Okay, thank you all for joining us. Welcome to our webinar, third in our series, Beyond Combustion, Electric Vehicles and Community Choice, a Sonoma County case study. We plan this webinar to be relevant to folks throughout the state of California that are interested in electric vehicles and advancing electric vehicles via community choice energy and local governments and folks, advocates anywhere in California. I think that will find some benefit from this webinar. So thanks for joining us, and I will now switch us to our main screen. So folks should now see our welcome screen there. Today's webinar is brought to us by eMotorworks with additional support from the Jonathan Logan Family Foundation, supporting our work in general. eMotorworks is an award-winning Silicon Valley company revolutionizing how we charge electric vehicles. Its ChooseNet-enabled hardware and software allow EV drivers to optimize their charging load for renewable energy and lower energy prices. For electricity service providers, eMotorworks aggregates fleets of its EV chargers on the electric grid to ease load congestion and increase reliability during peak times. For more information, you can visit eMotorworks at emotorworks.com. So a few housekeeping notes. By the way, my name is Woody Hastings, if I didn't mention that, and I'll introduce myself and some others in a moment. Couple housekeeping items. We have 3 handouts for this webinar. The PowerPoint presentation, the report, the white paper about electric vehicles, and also some presenter bios. The webinar is being recorded, so that will be made available to all of you. If anyone's having any difficulty hearing or seeing what's going on, rest assured you will at least have the recording afterwards. You can enter questions anytime in your control panel, and we will reserve the last 15 or 20 minutes that we have for the Q&A session. And by the way, those handouts should also be visible in your control panel, and you can download those. They will also be in a repository on our Clean Power Exchange website, where the recording will also be housed. So, the introductions. I am Woody Hastings there on the left, and Renewable Energy Manager for the Center for Climate Protection, and helping us with the technical and Q&A later in the session, Ross Markey. Our presenters today are Doron Amiran, the study lead author and our electric vehicle program manager here at the Center for Climate Protection, and Cordel Stillman, director of programs for Sonoma Clean Power. A little bit about our work at the Center for Climate Protection. We have the Clean Power Exchange program, and a lot of that work is housed in a website, cleanpowerexchange.org, where you will find an interactive map of the status of community choice energy in every single city and county in the state of California. It is a movement that's underway in about half of the counties in the state, and over 300 cities in the state are either operational or engaged in an evaluation of community choice. We also have bi-weekly e-news that goes out with information about community choice and renewable energy, and you can subscribe to that. It's broken down by geographic regions. We also just recently uploaded a new electric vehicle page, so we hope folks will visit that. That is a hot link there, so when you download the PowerPoint, you can get right to that electric vehicle page, and it's an electric vehicle page that talks about how the relationship between community choice and electric vehicles. We have been working on a series of white papers. We have 2 others that we're going to be doing webinars on, one on the status of solar energy and its relationship to community choice, and also statewide impact of greenhouse gases and costs of the community choice movement in the state. Our symposium, our next symposium on the business of local energy is coming up in May of 2018 in Sacramento. We hope y'all can join us for that. And our next webinar is going to be on October 18th, and that is going to focus on the state of solar energy and community choice. So a little bit on the statewide perspective of activity relative to EVs in the state. In this past legislative session, there was a bill introduced by Phil Ting, Assemblymember Phil Ting, AB 1184, a bill really modeled on the California Solar Initiative, that 10-year program that really is what resulted in solar becoming much more affordable and prevalent in the state. A very similar program, $3 billion over 12 years. The money is from the cap and trade program. The goal would be to get 1.5 million EVs in California by 2025. That bill has gone to a 2-year bill, so it'll come up again next year. I just talked to the office the other day. They are planning to bring it back in January, so stay tuned for that. And so I'm sure there will be a lot of activity on that. Support for clean transportation, 2 bills, AB 134 and SB 119, did pass, and they were signed by the governor just this past Saturday, that provide a variety of that provide funds for a variety of clean transportation measures. And so about $900 million to the ARB, about $1.5 million or $1.5 billion total funds for a variety of clean air transportation measures. So that concludes my introductory slides. I would now like to hand control of the screen over to Doron Amiran, who will hold on a second here. Let's see. Oh, sorry about that. Clicking the wrong button. Doron. Clicking it over to Doron and putting it back to full screen. So Doron, you should now have control, and if you unmute yourself, you should be able to talk to folks.
Okay, great. Thank you, Woody. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Excellent. That probably means everybody can hear me. Well, thank you all for the opportunity to talk about electric vehicles in Sonoma County and indeed throughout the state of California, and partner with Cordel from Sonoma Clean Power to really highlight the relationship between CCAs and electric vehicles. I'd like to start by just mentioning briefly that part of the reason that this is so timely, we just completed a report, so Woody alluded to earlier. It's entitled Beyond Combustion, the same title as this presentation. And that report, or white paper, took a look at electric vehicle trends, goals, and recommendations here in Sonoma County. So some of what I'm talking about today will come right out of that report. And if you want more details, as Woody mentioned, there is a link available for you to download that report. And I suggest if you want more details that you take a look. There's a lot of interesting facts and figures in there. But let's talk about some of what we found in this report and how that applies throughout the state. And here we go. There we go. All right. Perhaps it's good to start briefly with an overview of why electric vehicles. I think most of the people who are tuning in here are probably already enthusiastic about electric vehicles. Maybe many of them drive them. Nevertheless, I think it's important to recognize some of the key facts. Over half of greenhouse gas emissions come from transportation. In Sonoma County, which is a sort of suburban / rural community, that's even more because we drive a lot. In our case, it's closer to 2/3. But what that tells us is that if we don't tackle transportation, it doesn't really matter what else we do, we'll never really be able to get our greenhouse gas emissions down to where they need to be to avoid the catastrophic impacts of climate change that we're already seeing start to happen across the Caribbean and everywhere. Second key fact, the quickest path to reducing fossil fuel combustion is to electrify everything. And I do mean everything, from home heating and water heating to transportation. And the reasons for those are many, but in a nutshell, you should keep in mind that the electric grid is getting cleaner by the day, largely thanks to the work being done by CCAs around the state of California. Therefore, if I, for example, I'm considering, do I buy a gas car today? Hey, it's a very clean gas car. It gets very good gas mileage. Maybe it's a Toyota Prius. Maybe I get 50 miles per gallon. Nevertheless, over the lifetime of that vehicle, the emissions from that vehicle will remain consistent. Same emissions 10 years from now as I am emitting today. On the other hand, if I were to start driving an electric vehicle, which I did about 2 years ago myself, not only is it cleaner from day one, but it will keep getting cleaner day by day as the electric grid gets cleaner. So really important, keep in mind, quickest path to reducing fossil fuel combustion, electrify everything. Finally, EVs can help flatten out the supply-demand fluctuations of renewables, what's often referred to as the duck curve, which is the situation where we find ourselves with excess capacity, excess supply of renewable energy. For example, on cool, sunny spring days, we've got so much solar coming out and we're not using it all. Electric vehicles together with stationary battery storage and other strategies can be a key part in helping flatten out those supply-demand fluctuations. So if we want to keep growing renewables, growing electric vehicles goes hand in hand with that goal. So what did we find here in California? And specifically in Sonoma County, and again, this as an illustrative example for the state. We did a little bit of analysis. About 5,000 electric vehicles in Sonoma County now. That's a little bit more than 1%, about 1.25% of our total privately held vehicle fleet. In other words, we have about 450,000 private cars and trucks, and about 5,000 of them are EVs. We project a growth rate consistent with what we've seen over the last couple of years of about 30% per year. That means that by the year 2030, we're going to be at about 100 to 150,000 EVs. We looked at it another way. We asked how many EVs need to replace combustion vehicles in Sonoma County to meet our climate goals. And the answer to that is that by 2030, we need about 138,000 electric vehicles. If you really crunch those numbers and look at how many cars are sold every year here in Sonoma County, what we see is that by about 2025, the same date that Woody mentioned, the state of California wants to be at about 1.5 million total EVs, we're going to be at about parity. About 8 years from now, electric vehicles and combustion vehicles will be sold in roughly the same numbers here in Sonoma County. In other words, they're going to catch up. And that by 2030, the date that we're saying we're going to have 138,000 EVs here in Sonoma County, combustion car sales must effectively end. In other words, it's going to mark the end of the internal combustion engine age, which we refer to as the ICE age. Internal combustion engines, or ICE engines, have to fall into the dustbin of history. This may seem like a radical notion. There may be some eyebrows going up among some of the people who are listening right now, but as I will continue to illustrate through this presentation, and as we get towards the end, I want to take a peek into the future and look at what the car makers are saying, what national governments are saying, and what the industry in general is looking at. And I think we'll all agree by the end of this discussion that the end of the ICE age by 2030 is perhaps not as dramatic as it seems. And indeed, by 2030, folks may be looking back on the age of gas cars in the same way that we look back on the era of the horse and buggy. This is a graphic representation of those numbers, and I would draw your attention to the yellow line, and you can see a classic hockey stick growth curve that is perfectly in tune with the adoption of technologies from refrigeration in the first half of the 20th century to the adoption of smartphones, personal computers. Any technology you look at tends to grow in this sort of hockey stick path. You can see in around 2020, we expect to be at around 40,000 EVs, and by 2030, we'll be at 150, or certainly at least at 138,000, where the climate requires us to be. So that's a little graphic representation. Of course, it is contained in the report. So let's talk a little bit about some of the other reasons why EVs are a good idea. The environment is one that we've talked about. Climate is one that we've talked about. But I do want to mention the economic motivations and the economic benefits that every community can receive by switching from gas cars, which rely on fuel that is generally not from the local community, that is often transported a long way, either from out of state or out of the country, and switch to local CCA-provided renewable and increasing renewable energy. We did a calculation that the 4,500 or close to 5,000 now EV owners in Sonoma County are saving over $5 million in gasoline costs every year. That's $5 million that's not being spent on fuel that's coming from out of the county. That's $5 million, a portion of which is being spent on local renewable electricity from Sonoma Clean Power, and a good portion of that money is staying in the pockets of those consumers who are now able to use it for other needs, usually spending it here locally in Sonoma County. If we project forward to 2030, we're talking about $150 million per year of money that's going to stay here in Sonoma County. If we further extrapolate that number statewide, and if every community does what we're doing here in Sonoma County, we're talking about a figure by 2030 of $9 billion per year of money that's going to stay in local communities. Huge economic stimulus, $9 billion a year in the state of California, could be redirected into local economies through the switch from combustion to electric vehicles. So there's a lot of lessons from here in Sonoma County, and I think it's important for us to point out that what we've done in Sonoma County is good, but we all live in the same climate, and we're hoping that this model will spread throughout the state. Again, I mentioned earlier, Sonoma County is a rural, suburban mix, a little bit of sort of small cities, but we're not a big urban area. We have a population of 500,000 that's pretty spread out, and so what I would say is that if you're in an urban area, well, you can probably even move more quickly than we can with the advent of car sharing, ride sharing, and some of the other changes that are coming in the transportation sector. You might even be able to get to the end of the ice age sooner than here in Sonoma County. At the same time, I would say to those of you who are listening from rural parts of the state, you can have confidence. Some of the highest adoption of electric vehicles are in West Sonoma County, which is a fairly rural area dotted with small towns. People generally have to drive a fairly decent distance from place to place. They have to drive everywhere. I always joke with people, the only place I can walk to is my mailbox, at which point I'm on a highway. So my electric vehicle gets me everywhere, and EVs can have an important role in rural areas as well as in urban areas. A couple more things I want to mention. What can we do? And it was one of the key things that we looked at in our report. We tried to separate out the factors that are locally influenced from those that are not under local control. So for example, some things we in Sonoma County, even if all of us in California got together, we can't control battery technology and prices. We cannot directly control the selection of models made by the manufacturers. We cannot control the price of fuel, particularly fossil fuels at the pump. However, there are things that are under local control, and this is something Cordel will be talking about, something that we've seen here in Sonoma County, local agencies partnering, both business community, CCA, nonprofit community, local government agencies, to try to move forward the things we can control that include the provision of charging and charging infrastructure, both at home and workplaces and in public locations. Local incentives and additional benefits that can be offered to EV drivers and EV buyers, and Cordel will talk more about that and their Drive EverGreen program, and visibility and education, such as ride and drive events. So we recently had a big ride and drive event here in Sonoma County, and all of the various players, government, the car dealers, the nonprofit community, EV advocates, all came together to give people the opportunity to see and test drive electric cars. Key part of this is the cooperation. And I want to mention not only Sonoma Clean Power, the Center for Climate Protection, and other agencies, but we also have a Regional Climate Protection Authority here in Sonoma County, RCPA, that recently completed a study called Shift Sonoma County, looking at future of transportation, car sharing, bike sharing, electric vehicles, and what kind of policies and programs need to be put in place in order to get us there more quickly. And I would encourage everyone to go to the RCPA website and check out their site. And we may have some RCPA people on the line, and perhaps they could address that a little more later. So in the last minute or two, I want to just mention EVs and CCAs. The natural affinity that exists between CCAs and EVs is almost overwhelming. EVs are consistent with the climate goals of most CCAs. It helps create new customers. After all, EVs use electricity and CCAs sell electricity. And I mentioned earlier, it helps flatten out the duck curve. It's no coincidence that the first 3 CCAs in California, Marin Clean Energy, Lancaster Community Choice, Sonoma Clean Power, all have programs in place to help promote electric vehicles. And Cordel will talk more about that. Very briefly, what's coming up in the future? I mentioned earlier that we plan to end the ice age by 2030. How's that going to happen? Bloomberg recently published a report concluding that electric car prices will fall to be equivalent with gas car prices of a similar size and similar capacity by the year 2025. That's not that far in the future. Volvo recently announced that starting in 2019, all new models introduced will have all-electric drivetrains. And nations around the world are banning combustion cars, usually looking at dates around 2030. No coincidence. Those nations don't just include small liberal countries like Netherlands and Norway, but include major nations, big populations, and importantly, car makers like Germany and the United Kingdom. So, and again, with more time, we could talk about autonomous and we could talk about shared and all of this, but the transportation system is changing, and it's not too long in the future when people will look back and say, wow, you used to drive those stinky things? That's amazing. Don't forget, one of the most important reasons to go electric is it's just so much more fun. Something really empowering about charging your car like you charge your phone, and the driving experience of an electric car is literally parallel to none. They are the funnest cars to drive, and they will be taking over, I'm fairly certain. CCAs have an important role in that. That summarizes some of what we found in our report, and I'm now going to turn it back to Woody and Cordel and look forward to taking your questions at the end of this presentation.
Well, thanks so much, Doron. That was a fantastic presentation there. And I just want to and we'll get to Cordel soon. I just want to remind folks, we have over 80 attendees on the webinar today. So the way we are doing this is to have you type questions in on your control panel there, and please type them in anytime. We have Ross Markey helping us with the Q&A. You can type your questions in and he'll collect them, and we'll get to those in the last 15 or 20 minutes of the webinar. I also want to let folks know that may have joined a little bit later that we have also on your control panel 3 handouts available: the report itself, the PowerPoint slides, and the presenter bio. So just wanted to remind folks of that. And so then, without any further ado, I would like to hand it over to Cordel. Cordel, you should now have control of the keyboard and mouse. So can I see you move the cursor around a bit?
Yep, I'm online, Woody.
Okay.
So I'll get started. My name is Cordel Stillman, Director of Programs for Sonoma Clean Power, and I'm going to talk about a couple of programs that we've implemented at a pilot stage last year and give you a brief update on where we stand with those as a normal process. So we call our program Drive EverGreen, and details of that can be found at driveev.org. We are a CCA in Sonoma County, and we recently expanded our service territory up into Mendocino County. So for those of you not familiar with us, we're north of San Francisco, just across the Golden Gate Bridge. Let's see, Woody, where's my cursor? I've lost it.
Well, let's see. I think I also have.
There, I got it going.
Oh, there you go. Got it.
Okay. So Doron went over it pretty clearly why electric vehicles in Sonoma County, and we are of the same mindset. One of our goals is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and from day one we've done that with the electric supply. So we're shifting our attention to transportation sector. Our standard electricity mix has 42% RPS renewables, but overall it's 90% greenhouse gas free. Only 10% of our emissions or our electricity is provided by natural gas. We have a slightly bigger goal than the climate protection group in that we're looking at 10,000 EVs by 2020 and 100,000 by 2030. Okay, would you advance the slides for me if you wouldn't mind?
I think you got it.
Okay. So we started out our program by sending out a request for proposals to all of the dealers in Sonoma County that offered electric vehicles, as well as all of the manufacturers or the OEMs with electric vehicles sold in Sonoma County. And we asked them to put together their best prices that they could offer. We were going to go with one dealer for each manufacturer in our county, and we would drive customers to them through advertising and having this fixed price available. We've modeled this program after something we saw in County of Boulder in Colorado, and they were very successful there a couple of years ago in driving customers to EVs and getting a big spike in sales of EVs. So we did get two dealers to respond to that, Nissan and BMW. And as you can see here, they offered some significant cost reductions in those vehicles. We added on to those. We created our own incentive program, and it was $2,500 for our standard customers and a total of $5,000 for CARE and FERA programs. And those are a designation for our lower income customers. The way that it worked is customers could go online, enter their account number into a program that would verify that they were Sonoma Clean Power customers, and we would issue them a certificate either by mail or email, which they then took to the dealer. The dealer would verify that it was a valid certificate, and then the dealer would knock off that $2,500 or $5,000 off the already reduced price of the vehicle. This applied to both sales and leases. The dealers then would send the completed contracts, either lease or purchase, to a third party to verify that they had applied all of the discounts they had promised to those customers, and then we would send the dealer the $2,000. So the money never, our incentive money, our $2,500, the incentive amount never went to the customer, it went directly to the dealer. And that was made it much simpler for the customers than having to deal with checks and deposits and so on and so forth. The results of the program were fairly significant. We issued 556 certificates, of which 207 were actually used. We had a breakdown of about 157 Nissan Leafs, and the remainder were the BMW i3s. The Nissan dealer prior to this program had been selling 5 to 10 Nissan Leafs a month, and he sold 157 in 10 weeks. So that's somewhere around a 500% to 700% increase in sales over that time period. We issued $605,000 of program funds to the dealers to redeem those certificates. And 70% went to standard Sonoma Clean Power customers, and 30% went to our CARE FERA customers. And that's about the same breakdown as we have in the overall demographic of regular customers to CARE FERA customers. In conjunction with that, we also have what we call our clean charge.
Cordel, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I can hear you. I just got a note that some folks can't. So I don't know. Since I hear you, I don't know why that would be the case. Go ahead and continue. Maybe it's just the people here that are online. So just go ahead and continue. All
right, I will. So the other program we ran in conjunction with this was Clean Charge, where we offered free chargers to our customers. Customers paid shipping and taxes and installation, but the cost of the hardware itself, we took that on. All of these chargers were enabled with a program called JuiceNet that allowed them to be used for demand response, and we are currently working on implementing that demand response program. Through that first year of that program, 556 charging stations were delivered, and about 90% of them chose to participate in the demand response program. And that brings us to lessons learned, that bulk purchase programs do work. We saw a significant uptick in the number of vehicles sold in Sonoma County, and low-income customers tend to have a problem with credit when buying new cars, so we discovered that used cars have fewer credit restrictions, and we did incorporate that into our latest program. And of course, consumers wanted greater choice. We only had 2 vehicles in the program, so I think a lot of those certificates that were not redeemed were just that the folks didn't like the 2 choices that we did provide. So just a few words on our existing program. We did reboot this program starting in August of this year. We reduced the incentives from $2,500 to $2,000 and from $5,000 to $3,500. We did get a significant number of dealers involved this time, 7 dealers with 9 different models of vehicle in the program. The program runs from August 8th to October 31st, and to date, we're well ahead of our last year's numbers. We're about halfway through the program, and we've sold at least 188 cars, and we have well over 700 certificates issued. And we're issuing about 100 certificates a week and selling 30 to 40 cars every week. That concludes my presentation. Once again, there's the website, driveev.org, and looking forward to answering any questions that may have come over the line.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Cordel. That was an excellent presentation. Really appreciate it. So we are going to move into the question phase of our webinar. So hopefully folks have had a chance to type in some questions, and you can direct your questions at either presenter or to both. I'd actually like to start off this this Q&A with a question actually from me, which has to do with, and it's really for either of you, if you will. You know, it's sort of an ongoing concern of mine, which is that a lot of folks out there, and I heard a recent stat of 60%, are not even aware that electric vehicles are now available and affordable and practical, and that they can just go out to a car dealer and buy one. And I think part of the problem with that is that if you drive around in any given community, you can see plenty of gasoline station signs. They're big and bright and all that. But you don't really see electric vehicle charging station, field charging station. And so I'm wondering, Doron, if you're aware of any significant efforts to make charging stations, publicly accessible charging stations, more accessible, and Cordel, perhaps anything going on from Sonoma Clean Power's where you're at to make electric vehicle charging stations more visible? Anything going on with that?
Well, this is Doron. Let me just address it quickly, and then I'll turn it over to Cordel. You know, you raise a good point, Woody, which is that we spent 100 years building up fossil fuel infrastructure, and that includes gas stations. And most people know when they go out in their gas car, they're going to be able to find gas wherever they want to go. With electric vehicles, it's a little bit different. First of all, it's important to note a vast majority of charging occurs at home. As EVs get longer and longer ranges, that's going to only be more so. However, the point you raise is visibility, and the quick answer to your question is, you know, there are some efforts to sort of standardize EV charging signage, but I mean, I personally know that I've sometimes found, oh, there's an EV charger in this parking lot, and I got to drive all around the parking lot looking for where the heck is this thing? I can't find it. So we do need to do a better job with visibility, and that is a role for the charging manufacturers. That is a role for local communities, and all of that will, I think, help people have the confidence to know oh, look, everywhere I drive I see EV charging stations. Maybe I'll go ahead and buy an electric vehicle, even though once they do, they're probably going to find out most of the time they just plug in at night at home. So that's the answer to my question. You're absolutely right, and more work needs to be done in this area. Cordel, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I do. I want to talk about a couple of things that we're doing here at Sonoma Clean Power. We do work with local jurisdictions on siting EV charging stations. In fact, we have a deal with the city of Santa Rosa to put in 6 or 7 right in the middle of town on the town square with significant signage. But other things we're doing is working with large employers to put in large numbers of charging stations. Many of these large employers and large building owners understand that this EV revolution is coming, and they need to be prepared for it because it makes their property more valuable if they have these charging stations in place. So we're working with 7 sites in Sonoma County on putting in 20 to 30 charging stations at a time. Another thing that we found is that it's the experience, whether it's your own vehicle or another's, that drives people to try electric vehicles. A lot of our sales from this program have come from word of mouth from EV owners. Their friends see them driving them, they get rides in them, and then they become interested. So one of the things we're working on right now is a contract with Uber to incentivize their drivers to drive electric vehicles. And we're very close to entering into a contract with Uber to do that. And we'll do an evaluation after a 1-year period to see how many of their drivers have switched to EVs, whether this program incentivized that, and how many rides they've actually given to folks in electric vehicles, because that's the holy grail, is to get people's butts in the seats and get them out trying these electric vehicles and experiencing what it's like.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks for that. So Ross, have you received any questions there coming in for us?
Yeah, Woody, we have a few questions, and actually maybe a related question to charging. Actually, 2 questions. So one is from Claudia Saul, and she asked how JuiceNet works. And then before you start answering that question, another question came in asking if these free chargers or subsidized chargers were level 1 or level 2. And so I guess, Cordel, it sounds like those questions are for you, but Doron, if you'd like to chip in too there.
So the charging stations we're giving away are level 2 chargers, and we offer 3 different manufacturers, and they're all enabled with the JuiceNet technology. The way the JuiceNet technology will work is it will, by working with a scheduling coordinator, and it will also be what's called a demand response provider. They will aggregate these charging stations together into a block that then can be used to respond to signals from the California Independent System Operator to either ramp charging up or ramp charging down. And based on those signals, we can then hopefully generate some revenue for our customers by participating in our program. So that's it in a nutshell. It's a little bit, obviously there's a lot of complication to that, and how all those relationships work between ourselves and the charging station manufacturer, the software provider, all of that. And we're working through those complexities, and hopefully we'll have a pilot project up and running the end of next month.
Amen.
Okay. Thank you, Cordel. Go ahead, Ross. Other questions?
Yeah. So this question is for Doron. This came earlier on and during your presentation. When you were talking about EVs, and we've been this whole presentations about EVs, are we talking about PEVs, plug-in electric? Are we talking about battery electric? Could you elaborate a little bit?
Sure, that's a really good question. We struggled with this a little bit when we were developing our report, but the conclusion that we came to, and this is, I think, true mostly throughout the state, is that plug-in hybrid electric vehicles and 100% battery electric vehicles both rely on an electric drivetrain, and even though the plug-in hybrids also have a gasoline component, we bunched them all together. So when we were talking about the number of EVs, we're talking about both battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. Important to note, we're not including conventional hybrid vehicles like the classic Toyota Prius. Basically, the bottom line is if you can plug it into the grid and charge up batteries, and the vehicle will then drive on those batteries, we're considering it an EV, whether it also has a small gas tank or not.
And just to add to that, Doron, in our Drive EverGreen program, we have 3 vehicles that we allowed into that program, which are plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. And our criteria was that they had to go at least 25 miles on a charge, because that's the average commute distance here in Sonoma County. So we have the Chevy Volt, the Kia Optima, and the BMW i3 with the range extender are part of our program.
Excellent.
Yeah, and so this is Woody, and I'll just chime in a little bit on this and say that I do drive a Chevy Volt, V as in Victor Volt. So, you know, the range on that is only, you know, up to about 40 miles, and most of the time I'm able to do my commute on all electric. But on those days when I'm doing some extra driving around, and I know I'm going to be doing that, it would be great to be able to charge at field charging stations. So the more ubiquitous those are for the folks that have either a limited range vehicle or you know, a plug-in hybrid that has more limited range, or an older EV that's diminishing in its range. That, again, field charging stations, especially since we want to make EVs more ubiquitous, and folks driving with all kinds of different dynamics from far distances and a need to charge somewhere that's not their home, I think field charging is going to be an important piece of the puzzle. So that's my 2 cents on that one. Other questions, Ross?
Yeah, so let's see, we have a question, and maybe just a clarification here too, Cordel, because I believe you did mention this, but George Kopf asks if the Drive EverGreen incentive applied to used vehicles as well, and if used EVs did qualify, was there a limit on the number of previous owners?
Yes, used vehicles did apply. We had 2 dealers that submitted on those, and that was BMW and Nissan. Our incentives are less for the used vehicles. They're $1,000 for regular customers, $2,000 for Carafira. And we couldn't guarantee a particular price for those vehicles. Each vehicle is going to have different mileage, different year, different wear and tear. So it's really a buyer beware type of situation, and we try not to get too involved in that part of that transaction. And there's no limit on the number of owners between. It just has to come from that particular dealer so that we can verify the certificate and process that incentive.
Great, thank you, Cordel. So, got another question here, and this Corrine asks if you know of an EV version of a cost calculator for the true cost of driving, and Corrine would like to know if there's a comparison of combustion costs of driving versus EVs.
I do have an answer for that. There is a very good calculator on, believe it or not, Stanford's website. You can search their website. They did it for their staff and students, and it's a pretty good calculator of what the cost of ownership is. I do know of an app that's coming that should be available in the next 6 months or so, called My Clean Car app, and it actually measures your driving habits as you're driving a regular car, and then you can plug in different models of vehicles, and it will tell you what your cost of driving would be if you were in those vehicles rather than the one you're in. So very trick application.
Doron, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I do not have anything to add to that. I was aware of the Stanford one, but the My Clean Car app sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, and there was the folks at the North Bay Electric Auto Association circulated a sort of a life cycle cost analysis that was pretty thorough. I think it was last year. I'll see. I've got slots for 2 more handouts that I can add to the handout page. So maybe I'll put those in the repository for folks to download after the webinar.
Great. Yeah, and we can definitely get those onto our webinar page as well.
Right.
So here's a question that maybe both of you could chime in on. And Miles Hoffman is asking about barriers to people who drive 30 to 40 miles while commuting to work. And Miles asks, does SCP have programs or incentives for businesses to install more charging?
Yeah, I mentioned the workplace charging program we're looking at, and that is designed to get large-scale adoption of charging stations at businesses. And we offer that as a free service. Is that we're hired somebody to come into those businesses and do the analysis, look at the sites, look at the ADA requirements, look at the panels, look at their electricity use to see what effect this is going to have on them, whether there might be peaking charges, anything of that nature that might be either an incentive or a disincentive to putting in these charging stations. On top of that, we'll do a request for proposals for the actual EVSE hardware, and we'll also work with them on finding contractors to actually do the installation of those charging stations. So that's what we're offering right now. And what should come out of that, what my ultimate goal to come out of that is a kind of a how-to guide for businesses who want to install charging stations. Here are the pitfalls, here are the benefits, here's what you need to look at, here are the permits you require, and here are the ADA issues you need to look at, so that we can hand them a booklet and say, here's how you do this, and not in the most efficient way possible and not get tripped up along the way.
That's great. I also just want to mention one other thing, which is that in many parts of the state, there is also additional support for workplace charging available from air districts. We haven't really talked about air districts yet, but the Bay Area Air Quality Management District that stretches throughout the 9-county Bay Area has a program called Charge, with an exclamation point at the end of it, in which they do provide grants for workplaces and other locations that want to install publicly available EV charging, and that can help defray some of the costs. That is also true in other air districts. It varies from air district to air district, but if any of you folks are interested in finding potential support for installation of workplace charging, air districts are a place to look at, as well as CCAs.
Good point. Yeah, I think probably should just mention there are a lot of support. There's federal tax credits and state monies, so a variety of incentives and such. This particular webinar really just sort of focusing on that connection between community choice and electric vehicles. So yeah, lots more going on out there in the world of EV adoption. Ross, how are we doing? Any other questions?
Yeah, Woody, they keep coming in, so we do have a few. And here's a question that, again, maybe both of you could discuss. And it's what type of greenhouse gas reduction credits cities can receive for EV chargers towards their AB 32 reduction?
That's an excellent question. The greenhouse gas reductions are usually based around the vehicle. Doron, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the low carbon fuel standard allows for some credit for the sale of a vehicle or the purchase of a vehicle. And right now that money comes through the IOUs. And for example, PG&E, they have a $500 rebate that they give to electric vehicle owners. They don't make a big deal out of the fact that it's not their money coming to you. It's actually from the low carbon fuel standard. But they do offer that, and people take advantage of it, and it happens very quickly. So that's really where that the credit for greenhouse gas reductions comes from with electric vehicles. And Doron, is there anything other than that you're aware of?
Yeah, that is, to the best of my knowledge, that is what is currently available, and that's a $500 credit to individual owners of EVs. It's a very simple process. If you have an EV and you haven't gotten your $500 from PG&E, you just need to go on their website. It's the Clean Fuel Vehicle Rebate, I believe it's what it's called, and you just snap a photo of your registration card and include your PG&E account number, and they send you a $500 check. But I don't believe there's anything available, as the person asked. I don't think there's anything available through that pot of money specifically for charging. So that's what I know. What do you got, Ross?
Got some more questions for you. Let's see. This is a question from Trina, who asks, both speakers, are there any current or planned efforts to target the deployment of larger EVs, such as delivery trucks or electric school buses?
Let's see. We are looking at the possibilities of electric buses here in Sonoma County, generally on a smaller scale, not the 60-passenger buses, but we are looking at them as potentially the last mile resort for a local commute train that we just got started up here. And we are working with our transit group, transit people both in Santa Rosa and in Sonoma County on the potential for larger scale electric vehicles. Not much action right now on the delivery side. I'll turn it over to Doron.
Yeah, so I think it's fair to say that the technological development of large-scale EVs is still a few years behind passenger cars. Same is true for pickup trucks and some other key components of the fleet. And remember that here in a place like Sonoma County, large numbers of people drive pickup trucks as their primary vehicle. And until there's a good alternative electrically, they're probably not going to make the switch to something like a Nissan Leaf. The same is true in large vehicles, although there has been a lot of development. I know we've got some companies based here in the Bay Area that are working on all-electric buses and semi-trucks. I think we're still a couple of years out from seeing those being deployed in large numbers. But through innovative work of CCAs like Sonoma Clean Power, hopefully we can accelerate that process.
One of the hurdles that we have with the local transit authority, and particularly the county of Sonoma, is that their diesel is heavily subsidized by the government and by the federal government. So it's difficult for them to justify a switch in the capital cost of those buses when their fuel is basically free. So that's one of our hurdles.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe we can get some help from the feds.
Yeah, flip those subsidies to EVs. This is Woody, and I just wanted to chime in on with that one aspect on this, which is that Lancaster Choice Energy, in partnership with the Antelope Valley Transit Authority, they're operating electric buses at the ATVA, and Lancaster Choice Energy is providing the charging for those buses, and so there's a partnership there, and the BYD is the company name that builds these buses, is located in Lancaster. So there's a strong partnership synergy going on there with Lancaster Choice Energy, the third community choice agency to launch in the state. Just wanted to mention that. Ross, other questions? We got still have about 4 minutes till 1. So other questions? Yeah,
and this one's related to what you were just saying, and either Doron or Cordel, if you're aware of any other EV programs that CCAs are planning, or any other EV programs in the state that are going to launch. And let's see, also asks, particularly in large areas like San Jose, San Diego, or Alameda.
I have been talking to a lot of people about the success of our initial program. San Francisco, we talked to them a few days ago. Sacramento Municipal Utility District was here and talked to us for a couple hours about it. So I would expect that as news of this success we've had here travels, that you'll see more programs like this popping up. And I would point out that Boulder, Colorado did this program not as a CCA, and they did not have an additional incentive beyond what the dealers provided. So it does not require a CCA to do this type of a program.
Right, and I would just add to that by saying that most of the CCAs are looking at EVs. At this point, Sonoma Clean Power is kind of the leader in terms of making investments in this area, but as far as supporting ride and drives, public education, information, we're seeing that happening throughout the CCAs around the state.
Okay, good. Ross?
Yeah, do we have time for a last question here?
Yeah, I think so.
So there were a few questions, Cordel, about the number of certificates that were awarded to SCP customers and the total number of vehicles purchased, as well as the number of chargers that were handed out or awarded. Could you talk about those a little bit?
Sure. Let's see, the initial program, we had over 500 certificates issued and 206 vehicles, so about 30% or 40% of the certificates were redeemed. We're seeing a similar situation this year, and the only, we don't have a real good explanation for this. We do a post-program survey of all the customers who either got certificates and did not purchase, and also the people that did. And last year, the responses were more that they ran out of time. They didn't have enough time to make a decision because it is a short duration program. Last year, the complaints was also that we didn't have enough choices. They didn't like the two vehicles that we had. The Nissan Leaf was a lower end vehicle and the BMW was a higher end vehicle. So now we have vehicles all the way through that spectrum of economy car to luxury vehicle, including Mercedes-Benz. So I think that's really the two main reasons why people didn't act on those certificates. The charging stations, first year of the program was about 550, and to date we've added, as of July 1, we've added another 230. So we're well over 700 chargers that have been issued, and not sure what else to tell you about that program. It's just that we're still working on getting that demand response program up and running.
Thanks, Cordel. And folks, we are pretty much at time, so I am going to draw things to a close. Thank you so much to our fantastic presenters, Cordel Stillman and Doron Amiran. Really appreciate you guys being on to do this. Really good job. Thank you. And so want to let folks know next webinar that's going to focus on solar energy and community choice with Chris Cohn, a study author. Again, another report that the Center for Climate Protection produced. And Brad Hebner, the policy director for CalSIA, the California Solar Energy Industries Association, to give us a statewide perspective. That registration page is live now, and so you can get to it from that link right there that will be on the PowerPoint. Thanks again to our sponsors, eMotorworks, and for general support from the Jonathan Logan Family Foundation. And my contact information for any follow-up, anything, questions, whatever, that's my contact information. So with that, I will thank everyone for participating and look forward to seeing you on future webinars. Have a great day, everyone. Have a great weekend. Take care.
Thanks, Woody.